I'm Dr. Sylvia Peregrino, government professor at El Paso Community College, and this is Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. Today, I'm honored to have Ms. Diana Washington Valdez, author of Cosecha de Mujeres, which is the Spanish version, and The Killing Fields, which Harvest of Women, which talks about the murders of women in Ciudad Juarez. This book was recently re-released last year, and so we brought Ms. Washington Valdez as a guest virtually to talk about what's new. And so, Ms. Washington Valdez, welcome. Thank you for being a guest.
It's my pleasure, and please call me Diana.
Thank you, Diana. Diana, tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, I best describe myself at this stage of life as a lifelong journalist. I've worked in daily journalism for 35 years. Most people associate me with the El Paso Times, from which I retired in 2016, but never retired from journalism. I'm also an author, and I've done collaborations with documentaries on numerous topics, some of them national, some of them international. So I find ways to continue being a journalist. I've done commentaries for radio, for Canada, for Mexico, and so I found myself always busy, basically doing the same thing.
Your book and yourself as a journalist have been awarded various recognitions. I remember Las Americas gave you an award, and so a lot of what you're known for is also for this, your book and your research into the killing fields. You wrote that book in 2006, but how did it first come to fruition?
Well, I was working at the El Paso Times, and when I began investigating the femicides in Juarez, and the point of my delving into that whole issue was I was trying to find out who was killing the women and why. Everything I had read up to then basically told us or reported that here's another body, here's another victim, and that sort of thing, but nothing there ever really said what was happening. And that was my whole objective in this investigation. Somebody's killing the women and somebody's getting away with it.
And I think earlier as I was rereading the book, I commend you for giving a voice to these women. I know that that many were young, 15, 16, young women, or early 20s as well. And yes, and they were just kind of treated as disposable. So I want to commend you for doing the research and delving into the issue. How difficult was it to make the connection with the families, or did they want to tell their story, or was it something that that people were hesitant to talk about?
The families that I talked to were eager to tell, anyone what was happening and why. Some of them had missing daughters and still had not found them. Others had daughters who had been murdered, and there had been no justice. But it was also a very difficult thing to do, is to sit there and listen well to the pain that they were suffering. It was, I think, the most challenging aspect, frankly, of this investigation was the emotions of the families and how impotent and powerless they felt, and thinking about, what can I do? That was it. And they were also important as primary sources. You had to talk to the families. They had a lot of information that was provided to investigators, to police, that seemingly was being dismissed. And so it was important to talk to them.
Also, from the point of elected officials, it seemed like there was a lot of victim blaming, that they would allege that a lot of these young women were either at the wrong place at the wrong time, or using drugs, or in prostitution. And so I think that it was, I guess, trying to get themselves off the hook for not solving these crimes, that they were blaming the victims, that if they were, if they had been home, that they would have been okay. Did you find that as well, that a lot of lies were fabricated about the young women?
Yes, not only were they fabricated, but it was a form of callousness on the part of the authorities toward the families, a lot of disrespect to them. For example, they would say that the young ladies were to blame because they were wearing miniskirts. In fact, most of the victims wore normal clothing. Some of them wore their maquiladora uniforms. They were young women or girls, frankly, teenagers, young teenagers who were on their way to school, on their way to carry out an errand when they disappeared, and then they were found dead later. They were not. If there were prostitutes involved, we're talking about maybe 3 or 4 persons, and even then, that doesn't give anybody the right to kill anybody, especially in a brutal manner, which many of these young victims were slaughtered.
And so, what's in the new edition? What further research did you do, or what numbers were updated?
Well, I want to explain that something very important. The time frame the investigation covered would not have resulted in different conclusions. There was no point in reinvestigating the crimes. Mm-hmm. I was very satisfied that the work was as complete as it could be. The only thing I did was to smooth out some rough patches, because in the rush to publication back then, there was like, do you want to do another take? Do you want to do another draft? No. I want to get this out immediately, as soon as possible. And so, like I said, smoothing out some things. And at the very end of the book, both in Spanish and English, we gave like the latest number of femicides. But we're talking about now another generation that has grown up since the book was originally published. And some conditions, of course, have changed and are different, except for the violence. It's worse than ever. Total lawlessness in some regions of Mexico, including the Juarez region, where it concerns young women.
In the book, you kind of talk about how a lot of the young women worked in the maquila industry, and there's maquilas all over the border, but it seemed that this violence was endemic mostly to the Ciudad Juarez area, not so much in Tijuana or Matamoros. Talk about why you think that's the case, why it was in this region more than other regions in the border.
One of the professors at the University of Texas at El Paso, Cheryl Howard, sociologist, I believe she's now retired, collaborated with a professor in Mexico, and they were able to prove statistically that Juarez had more women's murders than other border cities like Tijuana, Matamoros, and so forth. Statistically, they were able to prove it even using death certificates. But what we had in Juarez was a different set of ingredients. And that is what made it more violent, more dangerous, and why it was easier for the perpetrators to get away with killing the women and terrorizing an entire community. We had the drug cartels, we had gangs that the FBI had said were killing women as a way to initiate new members. We had a group of prominent men who were killing women for sport. We had the copycats, and we had 2 or more serial killers who, by the way, have never been arrested. So all of those things converged in one place. So you're not going to find all of those things in one place in every place that you have in Juarez.
So just a unique set of circumstances. And then you also mentioned that maybe sometimes deaths were underreported because maybe they weren't classified as femicides, or the government didn't want to have a bad reputation, so that they would downplay or not even mention when more bodies were found.
Yeah, so that in itself I found to be atrocious. In the beginning, I learned, for example, that in the official reports of Chihuahua State, women's murders were classified under miscellaneous crimes. Miscellaneous crimes. That was changed later because of public pressure. But imagine we have no idea. You know, it was very hard to keep track of earlier murders of women when we don't have verifiable statistics. And then there were intentional ways to hide bodies, to underreport them. There were certain murders that, for example, the drug cartels did not want publicized, bodies that were buried under several inches of cement that have never been uncovered, and so on. So it became like very difficult to maintain a precise statistic. There's no way to do it. No way to do it. All we could do was the best we could with official and unofficial accounts.
And I know that when you were doing this work, you yourself received death threats. Could you talk about that? Why, did that deter you?
Well, the threats came in different ways, and what I did was I decided at some point not to dwell on them, because if I thought about them a lot and I dwelt on it, I would not have continued the work. Now, they did give me pause. Frankly, they gave me pause. I had to stop and think about, should I continue with this? Is it worth it? Am I the right person for this? Should someone else do it? And all of those things. But after each pause that I took under real threats, and they were real, I want to stress, I decided to continue because I felt my only contribution to this whole saga was to provide, publish a document of the events so that these crimes would not be swept under the rug. And that's what I had feared. That was my greatest fear.
From reading the book, at one point you said that, that it was, it took a financial toll on you. Why did you stay with it even though it's such a depressing topic?
Well, the emotional toll is real, and as a journalist, we've been trained to set our feelings aside. And I did that for a long time, but sooner or later it comes back and it hits you and it just comes out. But I felt there were ways of dealing with this, and eventually I found the ways to deal with it and to continue forward just by maintaining my focus on what it is I was trying to accomplish. That's it.
I think I shared this before we started recording. I had the opportunity to meet two of the victims' mothers at a conference in Las Cruces through Professor Cynthia Bejarano. For me, when you read about dead women, of course it's sad, but you don't really put a face to it. But then when you meet the actual family members, it really gets to you. And I have a niece that could be the same age of some of the workers that have disappeared, and are still disappearing. I wanted to commend you for keeping their memory alive, because I think if people don't tell those stories, people forget, and maybe just their families remember them, but not everybody else. I want to commend you for doing that, because you not only did that for Rosario's family, but for many others.
Well, as hard as it was for the mothers to retell and relive these events, it was also very important because, like you say, they put a face to the crimes. And mothers went to many places. They were invited to speak at all kinds of places in different parts of the country, in Mexico, some went to Europe. But it's to provide that personal connection with people, understand that these victims were daughters, they're mothers in some cases, they are sisters of someone, they are real people, and their families are suffering real pain.
And I was impressed, with Rosario's family, the fact that they built a daycare to kind of honor their daughter's memory, and were trying to still remember her despite the negativity. So I think That your book does that it links, it helps us put a face to the families by hearing those stories. And so, I think that that's valuable in and of itself, even though it's been a long time. I'm sure that the pain is still with them,
Oh, yes.
and with the families. There's been some improvement, but how do you see the situation for women's safety in Ciudad Juarez? How do you think it's changed over the years?
Well, it hasn't improved. And the reason for that, and I predicted this in the book, that if there was not real intervention in these crimes, they would worsen and they would spread. And both things happened because there's official corruption. We have officials with ties to the drug cartels and organized crime in general, and that has not changed. In fact, that has grown, that has spread even further. And so as long as you have that kind of environment, you could not guarantee safety for any of your citizens. That is the place that Mexico finds itself in.
And so you believe that it's gotten even worse now, even though they do cosmetic things like maybe, more street lighting or putting telephones or things like that.
Well, you said it, cosmetics, but I do think we have a tool now that we did not have in the past for young ladies to try and stay safe, and that's the cell phones. Back when I started this investigation, that was not in wide use. It is now. People can have this instant connection, take pictures, images of potential suspects, et cetera, to provide the authorities with a way of putting together a timeline on these crimes. And also, they have now what they call the an Amber Alert system. Before, they did not have something like that. And so that too came about as a result of a lot of public pressure. All these protests, they did have an impact, and so that is something good also. Before, it was like hide the fact that somebody's missing. Oh, let's see, the body might show up somewhere, but don't tell anybody. It's everything's fine here, nothing's happening. And so now it's more realistic. Somebody's missing, they go into the system, we'll let everybody know. Everybody's on the lookout for this person. So that's very different. But the guarantee of public safety is not there.
And actually, as you mentioned that, it reminded me in your book, you do actually talk about how a lot of the groups were the ones that brought the public pressure with the pink crosses, the cross that's still on the bridge, that's metal. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, there were the femicides generated what I think are important and universal symbols as they have become. The pink crosses, the cross at the bridge, constantly reminding people that this is an ongoing issue that hasn't been closed. And I was told that cross, the authorities have wanted to get rid of it forever. But there are people who are influential, who care about this issue, who have not permitted that to happen. And so, like I said, symbols are important. And when people see a pink cross against black, they understand what it means. It's also interesting that early on in my investigation, for example, I spoke to someone from Japan, and that person said, you're working on something involving Juarez. And the person said, that's where they're killing women in Japan. They already had this knowledge in the 90s. I said, my goodness gracious. Okay.
And I remember that, because of your book and the work of the activists, we even had the vagina monologues, and Hollywood stars come to the border to bring attention to this issue, and the UN as well, right? So there's been a lot of good, at least public pressure that brought about some interest, and like you say, for the crimes not to be swept under the rug.
Yes, it gave visibility to violence against women in general, as well as the specific femicides that were occurring in Juarez. And everybody came to the border, you name it, United Nations, Amnesty, the people representing the International Commission for Human Rights, you name it, they all came. but they cannot take the place of the authorities who have the only jurisdiction and the only means for solving the crimes from a police standpoint, from a prosecutorial standpoint. And that's been the problem all along. FBI offered to help, El Paso Police Department offered to help. FBI sent profilers, experts, so forth and so on, gave tremendous advice. But, no one has that jurisdiction except the Mexican authorities to do something real.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there that, for us, I guess we're used to crime shows where, and it's not real, right? Because, they solve a crime within, a couple of days, at least fictionalized. But you make a good point that it's also maybe like a lack of wanting to solve the crime, right? Because in your book you mentioned how sometimes evidence was lost, or kind of blaming each other, right? That the municipal police can't do it because it's a state matter, and then the state kind of say no, it's a municipal matter. So I think you make a lot of that evident in your book, that and the point you just reiterated, that it's wanting to solve the crimes, and that something that they don't want to do.
There's not the will to do it. When you have police that primarily their main job is to work for the drug cartels, to transport and protect the shipments of drugs, to keep tabs on the rivals, that sort of thing. The last thing on their mind is protecting the community. And until that changes, not much is going to be different for the people who live in that place.
Yeah, that's a sad state of affairs, right? And I know, living here on the border, on the, when I hear about things, it's more if it's U.S. citizens that are killed. And so recently, there were 2 young women that were also found along Carretera Porvenir. And this was just, within the past few weeks. So these crimes continue. So why do you think a lot of these crimes remain unsolved?
For the reasons I mentioned before. There is not a will to get to the bottom of these because of who might be involved. A lot of the killers are being protected, especially if they belong to the drug trafficking gangs and the cartels. They enjoy a certain amount of protection, unless they're identified, usually by the U.S. authorities, and there's a lot of pressure to bring them in. And I tell you, I don't know why these 2 young ladies went to that part of Juarez. It's very, very, very dangerous, very dangerous. And I think sometimes the new generation we have of young women, they don't have a lot of details about the history of the femicides, and they think it's okay. So much time has passed, it's okay to go there now, no one's going to bother us. Things have not changed. Things, in fact, I feel are worse.
So you would encourage young women or young people not to go partying in Ciudad Juarez because of the ongoing violence?
That absolutely. Absolutely, I would not. And if they venture anywhere, I would, even in groups, it has happened where they get kidnapped, they get separated, and then they're killed. To have a plan, to have a strategic plan of safety. You can do that with cell phones, stay in touch, don't wander off with strangers, definitely don't wander off with people you meet on the internet. Like this one Canadian young woman who met someone on the internet. She goes over there. She was staying in El Paso. She goes over there, meets someone in a cemetery of all places, and they find her dead, bludgeoned to death.
We're kind of coming towards the end of time. I don't know if we've talked about a lot of topics, but if there's something that you would like to add.
This is something I tell everyone who is interested in these kinds of investigations, and I tell them, you don't have to go to Timbuktu to find out if something is happening that needs to get out there. Look in your own community, research, investigate, and you would be surprised at what you find out in your own backyards. There's enough material, enough things happening where you don't have to travel to do an in-depth investigation of this type if you're looking for that kind of work to do. And I know some students are, and they do eventually later on.
What projects are you working on now?
Yeah, one of the things, and people are saying, oh, you've been doing this forever. Yes, is the 1987 serial murders in El Paso attributed to David Leonard Wood. Working with a colleague, Trish Long, on this project, hope to get it done this year. Wood is on death row in Texas. He's been there since his arrest, many, many years, almost 3 decades now. That is an example of crimes that occurred that the authorities, if they had acted sooner, might have prevented some of these murders. And we find the same things in Albuquerque when I worked on the West Mesa murders. There, similar patterns. I won't get into that a lot right now, but collaborations with filmmakers on various topics. There's all kinds of things that need to be done, that I feel if I can contribute something toward that, to getting it, documenting information in a credible manner, and that's what I devote myself to.
And I know I'll be looking forward to reading that new book when it comes out. And I do talk about Mr. Wood. I teach government, so we do have a criminal justice chapter. And he was trying to get off death row, right, by showing that he was below average IQ, and and he didn't get away with it, fortunately. So I think you're doing a great job telling our stories. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview with us. And we appreciate your work. And I want to give you the last word. And thank you for being here on Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. And perhaps we'll have you when you publish your new book.
It was my pleasure. And I encourage everyone to, be a good student, especially be aware of your surroundings, and look at what you can do. Look at what you can do to help prevent, discover, and not everything is negative out there. A lot of good things happening as well.
Take care. This is Dr. Sylvia Peregrino, host of Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. Thank you for being with us today. If you want to watch any of our former episodes, please visit the EPCC TV YouTube channel, where you can find previous episodes of our show. Thank you.